Okay, let's walk through a quick installation and configuration of Active Directory Certificate Services. So, Active Directory Certificate Services we use to issue and manage certificates for asynchronous encryption on our network. And by doing it in-house, we can manage certificates within our network without having to go out and buy public certificates for every single device that needs them or every single user that needs them, which can get really expensive, or using self-signed certificates, which can become problematic because by default other devices don't trust self-signed certificates. So, Active Directory Certificate Services lets us build our own public key infrastructure that we can use to manage public and private key cryptography. All right, so we're going to do our add roles and features, role or feature-based installation, just like normal, and we're going to choose Active Directory Certificate Services and add the features to it. Now, Active Directory Certificate Services has several different role services. So the first one is a certification authority. This you have to have in order to issue and manage certificates. These next two, Certificate Enrollment Policy Web Service and Certificate Enrollment Web Service, these two work in conjunction to issue certificates via a web service to devices that are not domain joined. And that's the key thing here. It's to enroll and renew certificates even when the computer is not a member of a domain or if a domain joined computer is outside of the domain at the moment. So we're not going to worry about those two yet, but those two work in concert together. This next one is Certificate Authority Web Enrollment. What this does, let me cancel this real quick so we can see it. What this does is it gives a web interface for common tasks like requesting, renewing certificates, certificate revocation lists, things like that. So we want to go ahead and add that one. And that's going to require adding in a bunch of web services stuff as well using IIS. So we're going to just add those features, and we don't have to worry about those features too much. We've already added all the things that we need. Network device enrollment. This is used to issue certificates to routers, switches, network devices that don't have network accounts. And the online responder, we're going to go ahead and select that one and add the tools needed for the online responder as well. The online responder makes it easier to check for certificate revocations. All right, so we'll add that, the certification authority, certification authority web enrollment, and online responder, and click next. For the IIS, because we're only doing it, in this case, for ADCS, we're just going to leave that in place and tell it to go ahead and install. Now, this install is going to take a few minutes. It's not going to require a reboot. Uninstalling it will require a reboot, but installation doesn't require a reboot. So we're just going to let this run. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and then we'll pick it up to do our post-installation configuration. Okay, so when we come back to our server, we see that the installation is finished. So we'll click Close. And then up here we'll see that we have a notification, and that indicates that we have some configuration of Active Directory Certificate Services to do. So we'll click on that link, and we're going to start by specifying the credentials that we need. So you have to have the appropriate level of permissions in order to do this. Now I'm doing this as my domain administrator, so we'll be just fine. Credentials, Dalton Administrator. If I was logged into somebody who didn't have this, I'd have to change my credentials, but since I'm already logged into somebody with the right credentials, that's fine. So I'm going to click Next, and then we're going to specify which role services to configure. We're going to go ahead and configure all three of them. So we'll just run down through here, check them all, and click Next. Okay, we can run as an Enterprise CA or a Standalone CA. Now, an Enterprise CA, your CA computers or certificate authority computers must be domain members and have to be online to issue certificates or certificate policies. Now, this simplifies management by using Active Directory. It does make life a little bit easier. However, the drawback is that the CA must be online in order for this to work. Now, a standalone CA can be a member of a workgroup or a domain. They do not use ADDS. And the big thing is right here, they can be used without a network connection, or they can be used offline. And the reason that's so valuable is because you can put your root CA offline and then no hacker can get to it because it's air-gapped. It's literally not connected to your network. So a lot of places that are really worried about security or high-end public certificate companies will do this. Their root CA will be something that is offline or air-gapped and not connected to the actual network. Because if it ever gets compromised, then we have a whole host of problems. But as long as it doesn't get compromised, we know we have a trusted device. Now in this case, we're going to do an enterprise CA because we're not that environment and because we want the benefits of doing Active Directory. And it's going to simplify a lot of the things we're going to do later on. By the way, it is something that you can do is you can set up multiple CAs. So you could set up a root CA as a standalone, and then you would have to sneakernet because it's air-gapped, right? It's not connected to your network. You're going to have to sneakernet certificates back and forth to subordinate CAs, which we'll see here in the next page, that could actually be online and issue certificates to everybody else. But it still protects that root CA. So we're going to go with an enterprise CA, and then here's where we set the CA type. Is this going to be a root or a subordinate CA? So what we'll do here is we always have to have a root CA. Subordinate CAs will get their authority from the root. And that's where this could be an offline CA and these could be online CAs. The root CA is the top of the public key infrastructure hierarchy. It has its own self-signed certificate that everybody trusts. And all right. Now in this case, we're using a single CA because we're doing this for a small to mid-sized organization. So we're not going to have multiple CAs. You will do that, by the way, if you want to have that air-gapped root CA, or if you want, are doing a ton of certificates and you want to offload some of that certificate processing. So in this case, we're going to go with the root CA because it's our first one, so we don't have anybody else we can trust. And a root CA is always going to have its own private key. Now, we can generate a new one, or we can use an existing one. In this case, since this is our first device, we're going to create our first CA. We're going to create our own private key. So I'm going to leave that create private key and click next. And here's where we set our cryptography options. So key length, the hash algorithm, the cryptographic provider. This is where you can set all the specifications you want for that key. And I'm going to go ahead and use the SHA 512. And then this option down here, allow administrator interaction with the private key is accessed by the CA. We're going to go ahead and leave that unchecked for the moment and click next. So what's going to be the name of the CA? So it's domain dash machine name dash CA. That's fine. The distinguished name and the entire distinguished name, all those defaults are fine. How long do we want this to be valid for? We're going to go ahead and leave it as a default of 5 years. You can adjust it. The more often it changes, the more management is going to take. And then last question, where do we want to put our certificate database? So similar things to storing the SQL database. If it's going to be large, you might want to move it off of the boot drive. Put it on another volume just for space considerations. In this case, we're going to go ahead and leave it as default because we are going to be fairly brief. Now, this gives us a summary of our Active Directory Certificate Services configuration. And if we're happy with all of this, we hit configure and it starts running through that configuration process. All right. Configuration has succeeded. Click close. Active Directory Certificate Services are enabled. We see that we've configured or completed our feature installation and our post-deployment configuration. And in our, in our tools, we'll see that we should have a certificate authority. All right, so that is your initial installation and configuration of Active Directory Certificate Services.